Hello, 5th graders. Today we are learning about the Vikings. Our guiding questions for today's lesson will be, who were the Vikings? And when and why did they arrive in North America? Before we get started, I would like for you to think about what images and words come to mind when you think of the word Viking. Take about 2 minutes to write in the warm-up section of your folder your thoughts, words, and images that come to mind when you think of the word Viking. You can go ahead and pause right here until you are ready to continue. There are many myths associated with the Vikings. The most famous and pervasive myth is that all Vikings wore double-horn helmets. This is simply not true. Actually, this myth was invented in 1876 when an opera was produced about the Vikings. The costume designer of the production of the play depicted the Vikings wearing this style of helmet, and after that, it just stuck. Here you see a painting, also from the 1800s, that shows another Viking wearing a similar styled helmet. Well, what do we know about the Vikings? Well, we know the Viking Empire existed between 700 and 1100 AD, and the Vikings' homeland was in Scandinavia. That is the northern part of Europe, near Norway, Sweden, Denmark. Finland can also be considered part of Scandinavia. The Vikings were an agricultural society, meaning that they farmed mainly, and they also raised cattle and other livestock. However, during this time, around 700 AD, the earth was going through a warm period. So farming was great. They were able to produce a lot of food. However, when you have a surplus of food, it also affects the population. Soon, there were too many people living in parts of Norway, Denmark, and so they got a little too overcrowded. In addition, all of that farming eventually caused the soil to erode and not be as nutrient-rich. It was more rocky and it was difficult to plant. Many people desired to leave and find new land where they could stretch out a little bit and farm and continue their lifestyle. So where did they go and what did they do? Well, the Vikings were excellent at sparing the seas. Using their impressive longboats, they traveled southwest to England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. This is known today as the United Kingdom. Some inhabited these new lands, created their own farms and settlements, and continued their own way of life. Others, however, pillaged, stole, and raided the coastal villages, often killing priests, monks, nuns, and villagers while taking their most precious and valuable treasures. In fact, this is how they got their name, Viking, which means raider or pirate. Take a look at this beautiful treasure that was given to a Viking woman in Norway. It was taken from a Scottish church. This copper box would have been used to hold precious sacraments of bones or saints in the early Christian churches of Scotland. Inscribed at the very bottom of the enameled box are the words carved in runes, "Rainbag owns this." The Viking who stole this box staked his claim by putting his name on the loot. This archaeological find proves that Vikings did raid and plunder coastal villages. Now, let's read some primary source accounts from histories of individuals who witnessed these Viking raids. It's important to keep in mind that many of the people living in the coastal region of the villages had never experienced outsiders before, nor had they ever seen ships arrive at their shores from distant lands. They lived a pretty isolated life, and many were illiterate and didn't know much about the world. It was a different time back then. Here is an account from 793 AD. Lo, it is nearly 350 years that we and our fathers have inhabited this most lovely land, and never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. Nor was it thought that such an inroad from the sea could be made. Behold, the church of Saint Cuthbert, spattered with the blood of the priests of God, despoiled of all of its ornaments, a place more venerable than all in Britain, is given as prey to pagan peoples. Pagan would have been a word used by early Christians to describe anyone who was not a Christian. The Vikings were religious. They believed in gods such as Thor and Loki, but they were not Christian until much later in the 12th century. Now, let's look and learn more about the Vikings. Were they all barbaric men and women who murdered and stole from others? Absolutely not. Remember, the majority of Vikings lived peacefully as farmers in Scandinavia. So let's look at a few artifacts that can tell us more about the Vikings. Take a look at the top left corner of the screen. Here we see an ironing board that a Viking woman would use to smooth out the wrinkles in her clothing. A woman would have heated the blue spherical stone in the fire and then rubbed it up against the board to de-wrinkle her clothing. On the right side of the screen, we see an ornately carved staff that was found inside the tomb of a Viking queen. Notice how intricate and beautiful the carvings are. On the left bottom side of the screen, you see 3 statuettes carved out of walrus tusks. These were actually found in a Viking settlement in Scotland. We also have evidence of Viking clothing and jewelry, showing that many wore the latest European fashions of the day. Notice the long ponytail on the hood of the woman's cloak. This tail serves no purpose except that it was the style worn in Europe during that time. Another example of a fashionable accessory would be this lady's brooch. A brooch would be used to clasp together a cloak, similar to a button. Let's see what Viking ships look like. This is a Viking longship. Longships were graceful, long, narrow, and light wooden boats. They were nimble enough to be easily maneuvered in the fjords, or coastal inlets. However, a longship would not make it across the Atlantic Ocean. They would probably fall apart under pressure from the high seas. We know exactly what a Viking longship looks like because archaeologists have excavated several longships from the muddy coastal waters of Norway and Denmark. This longship seen in the picture was put together piece by piece. It now resides in a Viking museum in Norway. Here is a headmast that would have appeared on the front of a Viking longboat. The fierce-looking dragon would have intimidated any Viking enemies. Sometimes the Viking longships are called dragon boats because of these headmasts. Here you see an example of a Viking longhouse. This is actually a sketch of a settlement in York, England. Notice the sturdy stone foundation. Timber would have been used to create the wooden frames, and thatch or straw would have covered the roof of the longhouse, insulating it from the cold. Here is another picture of modern ruins of a Viking settlement in Scotland. For hundreds of years, this entire settlement was covered in sand until it was excavated by archaeologists. In addition to settling in lands known today as the United Kingdom, Vikings also settled in the island just west of Scandinavia in the Arctic Circle known as Iceland. Here it is on the map. Much of the land in Iceland was fertile and highly desirable to many Vikings. Many people moved there and began to farm. After 100 years, though, it started to become too crowded, just like in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. As a result, the Vikings began to settle even further west in Greenland. Greenland is actually 3 times the state of Texas. However, it's not exactly green. It's more ice and rock than actual lush, fertile land. Eric the Red, a courageous, hot-tempered man living in Iceland at the time, heard rumors of more land out west. With a group of followers, he set out on a journey and settled in the southwest tip of Greenland right here. Notice Eric the Red's journey is in red. Here is a picture of some ruins of a Viking settlement in Greenland. So the question remains, when did the Vikings arrive in the New World? Well, around 985 AD, A Viking named Bjarni Herjolfsson learned of the new settlements in Greenland. Hoping to make a new name for himself, he set sails for Greenland. However, his boat was thrown off course by blistering winds. Instead of arriving in the southwest Greenland, Bjarni traveled all the way to North America along the coastline. Realizing he had made a mistake, Bjarni turned back and made his way to Greenland. Bjarni's route can be traced right here on the map. When he had finally arrived in Greenland, Bjarni told people about the land that he saw. This interested Eric the Red's son, whose name was Leif Erikson. Here is a statue of Leif Erikson, also known as Leif the Lucky. Notice the last name. Back then, your last name would have been just like your father's first name, but with the extra son added on the end. Just like his father, he craved adventure and exploration. After hearing about Bjarni's discovery, Leif sailed west. And you can see on the map, he is in orange. He sailed west all the way up the North American coast, and he searched for the perfect land. He eventually went south to what is now known as present-day Newfoundland, near the coast of Canada. He found the most perfect island to settle, and he named it Vinland because of the many vines and berries growing everywhere. So what evidence do we have that the Vikings actually settled in North America? Let's look at some clues to uncover the past. Well, we have something that's pretty strong evidence. For example, this map was created before the printing press in around 1200 AD, and a Viking made it to show his understanding of the globe at that time. Now you can see Scandinavia is right here on the map, the United Kingdom, Iceland. This would be Greenland, and this shows what they thought was Vinland. We all know today that Vinland is actually Canada or Newfoundland, and North America is a huge continent as well as South America. They didn't know this at the time. We also have evidence right here is a woman's spindle. A spindle would have been used to create wool. And this tiny button part right here was found in Newfoundland, suggesting that women actually did inhabit Vinland as well, which meant that Leif wanted to settle and stay there for many years to come and possibly have a family. Here is a peculiar piece of evidence. This is a Scandinavian snail. It was found on the tiny island of Newfoundland, and it's not found anywhere else in the world except Scandinavia. It's thought that maybe these snails accidentally were found on a Viking ship and came all the way to Newfoundland, and then they inhabited that land, just like other invasive species do. We also have a piece of evidence in literature. There are pieces of text known as the Viking sagas, which include histories, tales of Viking gods and myths. In these sagas, there is a small paragraph that writes about a prince who sent 10 ships west. It is thought that some of those ships were sent as far as Vinland, but it doesn't say so in the sagas. Lastly, a woman's hairpin was found in Newfoundland. In addition, this is my most favorite piece of evidence of all. A doll created by an Inuit person, a native Inuit, was found wearing clothing that resembled a Viking woman's dress. Now, why would an Inuit person carve a doll that resembled a Viking? Only if they had had some kind of encounter would they have done this. So the last question remains, why did the Vikings leave? Well, there are no known for sure answers, but we do have many theories. Some people believe that bad relations with Native Americans and hostility caused the Vikings to turn back home. Others argue that climate change was a factor. It became much colder around the year 1300, and so it would be more difficult to survive in the Arctic Circle in Vinland. In addition, some people think that the Vikings were just homesick. It was such a long distance from modern civilization. They had no one to trade with, so it was hard to build an economy, and any resources that they needed from home would take many, many months to retrieve. All in all, these are the reasons why we believe the Vikings left their settlements in Newfoundland and Greenland. That concludes today's lesson on the Vikings. If you have any questions, please come to tutorial and I'll be happy to go over these notes with you in class. Also, please read chapter 13 and chapter 14. Have a good day. Thank you.